You were excited because you thought you were getting a 10% increase and you're wondering why your boss hasn't given it to you yet? Find out why. You've just received another fee increase at your child's centre, but you don't know why? Here is why and what could be going on for your service. Educators and teachers deserve more money. The thing is, how do we actually make it work for everyone? Women deserve to be paid what men get paid for the same type of qualifications. It's about time that started. But find out how the government has turned this into an election promise and what's really going on behind the scenes. What would happen if the childcare centre that your child goes to closed down? Think about it, because it's already happening around our country. Welcome to the I Am Education podcast, where we explore transformative ideas for parents, educators, and anyone passionate about shaping the future of education and humanity. Join us as we dive into the latest insights, practical tools, and inspiring conversations that empower both children and adults to thrive. Let's unlock the potential of education together. I Am Education, for the love of learning. Welcome to the I Am Education podcast, where we delve into the pressing issues shaping our educational landscape. I'm one of your hosts, Rebecca Grugan, and today we're going to explore the Worker Retention Grant. Now, you may or may not have heard what this is, but it is absolutely fundamentally shifting and affecting the early childhood sector here in Australia. So I'm going to speak about what it is, how it's being structured, and the implications that it's actually having on our early childhood education and care sector. So on the 8th of August in 2024, the Australian government announced a significant initiative, the Early Childhood Education and Care Worker Retention Payment. This program aimed to address the chronic challenges of the low wages and the high staff turnover that we had in the sector. And they were going to do this by funding a 15% wage increase for eligible workers over 2 years. Specifically, this would have been done by a 10% increase commencing in December last year, and then an additional 5% added in December 2025. So this grant was for 2 years, and to access this funding, owners and providers of long daycare and after school hours care services needed to meet several criteria. One of them, they needed to be approved for the childcare subsidy. So if the service receives the childcare subsidy, then they were eligible for this grant. They needed to be, because it was only accessible for people who were in centre-based daycare and outside school hours care. Family daycare and in-home services were ineligible, and I'll speak into this and the impact of that more. The providers, so the owners and employers, had to provide a legally enforceable workplace instrument, something such as the individual flexibility arrangement, like a EBA, an enterprise agreement. And the thing here is that IFA ensured that the wage increases were passed on to employees. And then another limitation that was added for this grant was the limitation on fee increases. So providers had to agree not to increase fees by more than 4.4% between August 2024 and August 2025, and by no more than 4.2% the following year. And so while the grant's intention is to uplift the sector, it's actually starting to feel like an election promise by the current government. And it helps them look good by being able to say that they've raised the wages for early childhood employees by 15%. What many people, including you, may not know is that out of the roughly 13,500 eligible services, which represents 96.8% of all approved childcare, it's reported that less than 20% of the services have actually applied for this grant. And we are yet to have proof of anyone who's using an IFA being paid the grant, like actually receiving the money in their hand, and it's been 6 months since this announcement. The thing is that this application process has been so complex, even the people in the Department of Education don't know how to answer the questions they've been asked. And so many providers, especially smaller ones like mine, have found the application process cumbersome. And for many of us, the requirement to establish or to modify workplace instruments, the IFA, actually adds a layer of complexity that some services cannot handle. So much that the government has actually just last week announced a $10 million support fund to help providers apply for this grant that ends now in 18 months. And the thing is that you can only use 3 or 4 or 5, I think it might be 5, providers to help you apply for this. And those sector providers include unions. And these providers and unions, they're being paid this $10 million to provide a service which truly shouldn't be this complex. So the IFA has been knocked back many times. For instance, I am already up to the 5th edit based on the government changing their minds as we've gone through this process. And this is where it gets even worse. The same IFA, the exact same document, has been approved on one hand by another service and then rejected by somebody else in the department, even though it's the exact same document. And when you ask for feedback when you get knocked back, people are just being told to follow the guidelines, or they're receiving no feedback at all. If this is such a consistent problem, for what purpose have they not provided a template for all of the services to utilise? And this is where it starts to get really, really tricky. Because there are some big providers in the sector who have multiple centres, hundreds of centres, who all went in on what's called a multiple enterprise agreement, meaning that there's multiple different businesses in this document and in this agreement. And so far, they are the only ones who have received any of these funds. And it's this inconsistency across the board that is impacting the relationship between approved providers, employers, and their employees, the educators. The formula on how they plan to actually work out how much money you will get from the grant has not been shared publicly with any industry leaders. And now we have certain people who are leaders of our industry requesting senators to take this to Parliament to investigate, because we need the release of this information so that services can actually make informed decisions. One centre who has received some of the funding, they're part of the multiple agreement, it is less than 15% of what they thought they would get. And when they ask how it was calculated, they are getting no responses. And there are centres that are folding. There are centres literally going under, not being able to provide education and care for their families because they cannot meet these needs. These limitations are killing the sector. Understanding that part of this arrangement or the way this grant has been created, by being able to say as a government that we've also stopped the increase of childcare fees, i.e. we're helping out families, this mandated fee cap poses many challenges. You see, with operational costs rising due to inflation, it's not just people's food at home that's going up. Centres that are feeding children, your costs, our costs are going up. And this limiting of fees increases to the specified percentages, i.e. you can only put it up 4.4%, even if overall your costs have gone up over 8-10%. You cannot operate. And not just that, one of the biggest expenses in early childhood, if not the most, is the staff expenses. And they deserve to be paid more. They deserve to be on more. But with the regulation around ratios and how that gets abused and all the different states having different requirements, these wage hikes, where is the money coming from? Because at the moment, many centres were already paying their staff award wages, above award wages, I should say. And when we're paying staff above award wages, and then if we apply to be in the grant, we have to pay 10% on top of that wage that we were already paying above. And so this financial strain is jeopardising the sustainability of many services. The grant was announced in August 2024, that's 6 months ago, without any notice given to services about what the requirements would be. Mid last year, a number of those larger providers, the for-profit ones, the corporations, and the non-for-profit ones here in Australia, they raised their fees substantially before this information was released, before the imposed 8th of August deadline for fee increases. This action alone has people questioning whether certain people in these corporations knew what was coming and raised their fees to beat that 4.4% increase limitation. It is believed that this may be underhanded and has been reported to the ACCC for investigation. Some of these corporations are listed on the stock market. If any of that information was known before this government announcement, is that not insider trading? I'm just asking the question. Not only that, as somebody who used to have a family daycare approved service, we used to have 21 educators around Brisbane providing family daycare. The exclusion of family daycare and in-home care services, this is a significant portion of the workforce that misses out on any of these benefits. This actually exacerbates the disparity within the sector, the divide that is already happening because and since COVID. See, family daycare and in-home care, they provide essential services across the country. And they've once again been excluded from a government grant, this retention grant. There are many opinions, and whatever yours is around the need for FDC and IHC. However, the thing is that without them, many children and families would suffer. You would suffer because the thing is that family daycare provides services and flexibility to people who are shift workers, which includes our emergency service personnel, our ambulance, our nurses, our police officers. Nationally, family daycare provides the opportunity for education and care for children 24 hours a day. Our long daycare services are not doing that. They couldn't afford to. But family daycare is there to fill that gap. And again, they're being forgotten. This exclusion is just separating those in the sector and deciding who is more important than the other without actually talking about it. Another problem with this so-called solution is that it's short term. The grant only covers a 2-year period. This has led to uncertainty about wage sustainability once the funding disappears. Providers and employees, they are apprehensive about potential wage reductions or the need for significant fee increases in the future. What happens after the 2-year mark? Will the award rates have caught up with the increase and therefore there's no actual increase long term for educators? Do the parents cop a one-off fee increase that affects them? And we said 2 years, we're already 6 months into this, and very few employees or owners have actually received the funding or approval to get the funding. And they're doing the right thing by not raising fees, and they are losing money every single day. But at least the government looks like they're doing something great. 3 years ago, we had this same thing happen when it was COVID, when free childcare was announced. Once the job seeker, the job worker, whatever the hell that was called back then, once they realised the mistakes they had made, the government had to make up with a different fund, with a different grant a few months later. But that didn't really get spoken about in the media, did it? And so this impacts not just owners of services, where people think they're rolling in money. This impacts educators and teachers actually having access to this increase, actually receiving the money. And it impacts parents not knowing whether fees are going to go up or why fees are going up and what's going to happen in 18 months' time. Because the thing is that there are already wait lists where parents can't get children for care. We already have services closing down now because of this grant, because it's actually affected their viability. Because if they don't agree to the grant or to the 10%, staff are going to other centres, which means they can't open, they don't have enough in their team. If they put up their fees and put the 10% to educators, the parents aren't happy, so the parents go somewhere else. Whatever you do in this, there is no win-win unless you knew about it before it occurred. And so the delay in this implementation Reports indicate that as of February 2025, at the recording of this episode, there is a substantial number of childcare workers who have yet to receive their promised pay increase. The delays and the intricate application process that keeps getting knocked back by their employers. I mentioned earlier that most services have yet to receive approval or even know whether they will get their funding at all. And this has caused providers and employees friction because of the lack of information, the misinformation, and the misunderstanding of what to expect, and the reason why things keep changing. Owners, employers are starting to question the government and what's actually happening, and employees are questioning the intent of their employers because they don't know what's happening. Who actually knows what's happening? Who actually knows what the intent is? Because the government has created more uncertainty for everyone in this already stressed out sector, rather than the support that they said was going to come. So some services have started paying their employees the 10% increase based on the release and promise of the information from the Department of Education last year. But then they've actually had to stop paying their educators the 10% because the operational impact has been huge, and they are actually yet to receive the funding months on from their own application being submitted. That's a huge issue. That is a huge problem for trust. You see, the Fair Work Commission, they are currently undertaking and have been for a long time the Gender Under Evaluation Review. This case is, the results of it are due pretty much by the end of February, latest mid this year. And following on from that well-researched decision, this is the reason we're in this under evaluation review case is because of the Aged Care Award and what they went through with that. We are being considered because of that case as well, and it's overdue and it should have been done, and it's great. But the decision from the previous review noted, and I'm quoting here, the basis upon which the Equal Remuneration Order, the ERO, rates were determined to closely parallel the work value reasons upon which we are proceeding in this matter, the high female composition of the industry in question, the significance of the work being caring work, the disguising of the level of skill and experience required to perform the work, the gender-based undervaluation of the work, and the need to remedy the extent to which assumptions on the basis of gender had stopped the wage growth. Let me simplify that lingo, jargo, whatever that was. Basically, education and care, early childhood, we are heavily female dominated. Yet we have to have certificate 3s, diplomas, bachelors for certain roles to meet regulation. What the award pays people with those qualifications is not equal to men or males and different industries that required the same level of professional qualifications. That is where the review based on wages in a gender-specific industry are being questioned. So it's great. The thing is, though, that this is an expected 22% increase in wages over a certain period of time. How and who is going to cover this increase, if and when it comes into play, is being questioned. The fact that educators and teachers deserve a pay rise, for me, is in no question. However, it has to make sense. It has to be clear, and it has to support rather than hinder the sector and the quality of education and care provided to our youngest humans, which is what it really is about, isn't it? That's what matters here. The early years of our future leaders, the first 6 years of life. The data doesn't lie. It shows you that these are the most formative years. That is why we have such robust frameworks like the Early Years Learning Framework. The thing is, though, is that the respect and the way this is being done is not working. And while the Worker Retention Grant aimed to enhance those wages and retain workers, its current structure is having the opposite effect. For what purpose did the government not just wait for this gender undervaluation case? It's almost done. It's been going on for a long time. It's thorough. It's being done independently. But it just so happens that our federal government is due for an election this year, and maybe that review wouldn't have been out in time to meet that deadline. And so as much as I'm glad it's meeting certain assumed deadlines and people think it's a great thing, as they did free childcare, nobody's talking about, well, there are people talking about it, just not enough being heard about how this is impacting the care and education we can give the youngest humans in our country. So for this initiative to achieve its intended outcome, there needs to be a more streamlined application process. It needs to be clear. The department needs to understand what they're doing. This is not COVID where nobody knew what was happening and people were making it up as they go. There has to be clarity, because that lack of clarity is affecting the relationships that are happening within the walls of these centres, of these services. It needs to be inclusive in the criteria. And there needs to be some type of assurance for long-term funding. Addressing these issues, it's crucial to actually truly support the educators who play a vital role in shaping our future generations. I know that I am an approved provider. I know that I am an employer. I know that this grant is up for me to make it work and how to make sense of it, and I've got to make decisions for my centres and my business alone, and I understand that, and I take responsibility for that. The thing is that it's really hard to make decisions when the goalposts keep changing, and when the umpire or the referee doesn't even know the rules. And so I just wanted everybody to know that the worker retention grant is not working. David Morfitt from DJMIR, our industrial relations lawyer, is known and a massive advocate in this sector. He's just put out a survey to 10,000 services. And with the data that he's getting back, it matches what I've said today. The thing is that this is not something that we can sit on. If you want this sector to heal, if you want this sector to be everything that you talk about it being, we need clarity. Our educators and teachers, our children deserve it. I'm here for it. I just need the goalposts to stop moving. Thank you for listening. Let me know your thoughts on the worker retention grant and how it's impacting you as an educator, teacher, or provider. And what are you doing about it? Thanks for being here. Because of you, I am.